All right, folks, today on the HR and Leadership Spotlight Show, I'm bringing back someone that you met a few weeks ago. And if you have not seen the episode with Charlie Walsh, Global Provocateur, you really should dial back because Charlie did talk about his passion, his journey, talked about the future of organizational leadership, talked about training. The word training and where it came from in his world and where we are going. But I really wanted to bring him back today because Charlie has so much more to share. Plus, Charlie, you owe us more examples and a little bit more of a definition of what it means to be a provocateur, how one becomes one, the future and becoming a provocateur, the challenge to future activists and that sort of thing. But, you know, you also have a great deal of exposure to the global community. And
I sure do. I've been
really
lucky.
the U.S. versus and I'm laying a lot on you, so you know, up front, because I know once you get going, you're very passionate, you keep going. But the U.S. versus global when it comes to organizational development, and then I do want to get into your work with the Leadership Forum. You know, 102 years of activism. That is amazing. You know, 100 years ago, you know, the whole leadership community starting in some place in New York. And I'm not going to give away, folks, what Charlie's going to talk about. But I do want to welcome you back, Charlie. And thanks for coming back on the show.
It's my pleasure. It's a pleasure to be back, Chuck.
Excellent. So I know we talked a little earlier, you have a couple of mugs to share with us today that you could not choose from. I said, bring them both on. Bring them both.
It's tough to choose a mug. Of course, in our first broadcast, I talked about the Redskin mug and how it symbolizes where I grew up in Washington. But, you know, part of being a provocateur in my field, in the field of leadership and organizational development, is to recognize that there are provocateurs in other fields also. And this gentleman was probably the #1 provocateur coming out of the 50s. Everybody recognize my Elvis mug. I mean, think about this, particularly my generation, how boring music would be today if it weren't for this provocateur. And what he did is he stirred the pot. You know, he broke away from complacency, and he didn't listen to the critics. You know, there were many critics. So that's my favorite Elvis mug. I've got a nice collection of Elvis mugs. And I also was reminded, we had talked in our last session a couple of weeks ago about the wonderful experiences I had at Harris Corporation and working with 575 engineers that we graduated through the University of Florida Graduate Business Program. And they gave me a mug. So I kind of still have that symbol, that University of Florida and Harris. And Harris, from what I understand, Harris is still a key player on the campus up there in Gainesville. I haven't been up there in a couple of years, but they still continue to invest in the development of engineers, the training of engineers,
that's awesome.
the provocateuring of engineers that allow an engineer to, and think about this because this is not traditional, to allow engineering people, technical people, to become leaders.
Right.
You know?
Right. So, you know, I love the analogy of the Elvis and bringing that into our conversation about being a provocateur, because, you know, at one point, it's not only stirring the pot, but you're not popular. You know, now granted, Elvis was very popular, but there was a segment of the community of the culture that thought this is the worst thing that's ever happened to us, right?
Yep. Happened again with the Beatles in '64 also.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. But in leadership, right, it sometimes does come down to that. Yet what makes the provocateur successful? You know, I mean, you got to have a lot of gumption, I think, correct, to be a provocateur.
Well, it's funny that you picked that word gumption, because I've actually written a book that's in I think it's in final draft form, and the name of my book is Gumption. And
Okay.
it actually taught it that, and we did not rehearse this.
No, that's
really
good stuff.
It is, but my book Gumption, and I hope to get it published before I die. It talks about, it takes a lot of chutzpah and gumption and, you know, pulling the rug out from under the comfort of so many people to be a provocateur. And the very nature of being a provocateur suggests that, you know, you're not happy with status quo. You can't accept status quo. It disrupts your mind in a way that you have to sometimes, and I don't like this word, but you sometimes have to aggressively push the envelope forward. And sometimes you succeed and sometimes you don't succeed.
Wow,
I like that word gumption. It takes a lot of gumption.
Yeah. No, so can you, what's been talk to us then about the global perspective of organizational leadership and where that has been in your world, so to speak, and where that's going. Let's go there. Okay. U.S. versus global. I really like that topic.
Well, I never thought in my wildest imagination I would ever have a chance to do some global work. But it all started for me when I was at Stromberg Carlson. I worked for a guy by the name of Lou Whitney, and Lou encouraged me to go with him one day. It actually wasn't a day trip. It was like a 5-week trip. At the time, Stromberg Carlson was owned by General Dynamics here in the United States, a big military industrial complex. And Stromberg goes back to the 1800s, the original Bell, the manufacturer of the original Bell telephone. But in the early 1980, late 79, 80, a company in the UK, back then it was called England, by name Plessey Telecommunications bought Stromberg Carlson. And Lou said, Charlie, come on and get on the plane with me and let's go to England. So what do I want to go to England for? He said, well, he says, I'm going to introduce you to this really 21st century. And this was 1980, late 79, 80. I'm going to introduce you to a 21st century company called Plessey Telecoms. They were, at that time, the Ma Bell of England, all right? So the purpose of going over there was for them to certify and train me as the U.S. representative in a new program they had implemented called DOC, D-O-C. And DOC gave us the credentials, the if you will, the medicine bag, the kit, to come back to the United States and to, I guess, medicate leadership at Stromberg Carlson into a process called developing organizational capabilities.
Okay.
And it broke away, DOC, developing organizational capabilities. It broke away from conventional wisdom that management stood alone. It introduced the concepts of me to, you have to create the culture, you have to train leaders around that culture. The culture must be driven by specific leadership behaviors and specific management behaviors. And the real organizational growth comes when you blend those two. Okay. So I had the opportunity to go there and do that. And along the way, it also fed another passion of mine. Plessey was headquartered in Liverpool. And if you remember from my Universal days and even current days, I'm an avid Beatles fan. It's just, so I had a chance to do all the Beatles stuff in Liverpool. That was really kind of cool. But that was my first dip into global things. And it gelled in my mind that, you know what, this is really kind of strange, because here we are coming off the 70s in the United States, and we're still struggling with this global competition, competitive pressure, automobile industries, technology. We're right in the middle of the divestiture of Ma Bell. That's where the original phone companies broke up in this country. And I'm sitting there in Liverpool recognizing that these people are significantly further ahead than we are in this country in looking at leadership. And it was kind of alarming to me. So fast forward, I got to Universal Studios, loved it. And Universal's marketing department to this day remains in my mind, the best marketing department that ever existed anywhere in the globe in any industry. They orchestrated a program that allowed me as the training guy to get on an airplane with them and to go to countries like Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Canada, and they would spend like the greater part of a day at these big organizations, and they had also a series of what were called back then public seminars in these big hotels. They connected with some business schools, and they would present the marketing aspects of Universal Studios. And then they would turn the floor over to me, and I would teach people, this is how we teach leaders to lead at Universal. This is how we do guest service / customer service at Universal. This is how we look at culture at Universal. And the consequence was I got to travel all over these really cool first world countries. And again, it hit me right upside the head. These people are really significantly further ahead than we are. Because as I'm explaining to them what really cool things we're doing at Universal, companies like Telia in Sweden and Absolute Vodka in Sweden and McDonald's in Denmark and Sweden, they're sharing with me stuff that we've never done in this country. So we ended up kind of exchanging that. So, and then let's get into the end of my career at Universal. I left Universal and formed my own company, and I ended up through a series of happenstance, just good luck, of getting connected with a colleague of mine that still runs a software development company in Orlando near the University of Central Florida called Carly Corporation. And I'd helped them to develop some training manuals for the U.S. military in-flight cockpit training. And one day she calls me and says, we just won a big contract to do some leadership training for the U.S. Agency for International Development. And through a long conversation over several phone calls, I agreed to do the pilot and help them to put it together. We did the pilot. It just kind of died on the vine. And then a couple years later, after the Bush administration was elected, I was called in to refurbish it. And I ended up doing, I think, and my memory's kind of vague, but I think we did 28 of these leadership development programs for the U.S. Agency for International Development globally. And then it just was so successful, it transferred to the State Department. And I ended up visiting 19 U.S. embassies in other countries to help them retrain their minds to be provocateurs, And in doing so, here's what I was exposed to, Chuck, to answer your question. I was exposed to other industries, other governments, small companies, big companies, large companies in first-tier countries, third-tier countries that, as strange as it sounds, they had their arms wrapped around this thing called leadership significantly better than we did at that time. And remember, that was the turn of the century. For you young people, that was the most recent turn of the century. Many of you young people listening today probably weren't even born then, or were probably infants. We're talking about 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2005, 6, and 7. So here's the challenge, U.S. versus global. We've made some significant progress in this country in the last 20, 25 years, but we've still got an enormous amount of needle to move as the rest of the world has been able to wrap their arms around the need to be more focused on the leadership of people than the management of things. And they've been very successful in doing so to the degree that they've beaten us at our own game in many of the marketplaces that we're in. And they're building infrastructures for democracy with our help that the United Nations has now kind of raised the banner that says this is the way things need to happen. And the problem that I see in our country, the challenge that I see in our country, is allowing ourselves time, allowing ourselves patience, allowing ourselves and giving ourselves the opportunity to unlearn the comfort of the old that doesn't work anymore. And my only fear is that we might be doing too little too late. There are segments in our society that have moved the needle significantly. but there are a lot of segments that have not. We get so comfortable in how we became this great country called the United States that we're losing sight that we're now members of a global community. So we have to kind of do that. So the challenge becomes, how do you get people to shift their minds without giving them time to unlearn how they got there in the first place?
Okay, so you use the word democracy, right? And I've heard that term before when it comes to leadership, and it was democratization of leadership or something like that. What is that term?
Well,
something's coming back. Democratization, yes.
Democratization of leadership, and it comes from an organization that's been around for pretty close to 100 years.
Okay, so I had that right. I've heard democratization of leadership. Okay, gotcha.
It came from the Center for Creative Leadership that I've been connected with since the mid-1970s. I've been educating myself and certified in many of their programs all the way back to the 70s. And they've been around for a little over 100 years. They originally came from the Vicks VapoRub family. J.P. Richardson, this guy that was a pharmacist in Greensboro, invented Vicks VapoRub, and he made a lot of money with that during the Great Depression. And he formed an organization, a nonprofit organization, a research think tank called the Richardson Institute of Management Sciences. And over a series of generational transfers and movements into a for-profit and a nonprofit organization, research think tank. In the early 60s, they became the Center for Creative Leadership, and they're still the world's leader in terms of leadership research. They came up with a program, I want to say, I could be a few years off, about 9 years ago, called the Democratization of Leadership, with the argument that based on their research, their leadership competency models, global studies, that there were a lot of organizations, a lot of public and private sector organizations globally that were teaching young people leadership. Now, let me define young people.
Yeah.
5, 6, 7 years old.
Oh, my. Okay. Wow.
Preschool, kindergarten, all the way through 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, entry level of college. In our country, we've had a tendency to wait until you become a leader to attempt to backtrack and teach you to be a leader. So they came up with this program called the Democratization of Leadership, where they've actually rolled out successfully, and I think the number is 9 different states in this country, very targeted educational training and development programs for young people from preschool all the way through 12th grade. Mm-hmm. And in 2018, at the Leadership Forum, a little bit more about that in a few minutes, its 100th conference in Silver Bay, New York, sitting on Lake George in beautiful upstate New York. The 100th conference focused on, sponsored by the Center for Creative Leadership, the democratization of leadership. And I got to tell you, Chuck, we had a chance to meet with and listen to young people, preschool, 1st grade, 12th grade, that were telling us things about leadership. There were 100 of us provocateurs in that room that were considered gurus. These young people taught us more about leadership in 4 days in Silver Bay, New York than I've known in a lifetime. So it's really a great thing. And they're continuing that. They're just continuing with it. And it's, anyone that's interested in getting involved in that, connect to the Center for Creative Leadership, ccl.org. It's an exciting program to be a part of.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, you have invited me to sit in and join some of these leadership forum community group that's been around, right? But there's a term that they use, and it's a term I've heard you use, called incubating leadership.
That's correct.
And there's a concept for that. And so just wondering if you could explain for our audience, what is incubating leadership? What is that movement? What does it mean to be an incubator?
It's a very strong movement that's being fostered by the Leadership Forum community. The Leadership Forum has been, in fact, this year, in fact, tomorrow, we kick off here in mid-July, the 102nd annual Leadership Forum conference. It's not a physical conference this year because of of COVID-19, but it is a virtual conference that will last 2 full days. And the focus of the conference is incubating leadership. And under the direction of a gentleman that is significantly younger than me, but he's also a mentor to me. And there's nothing wrong with young people being mentors to us old guys, right? Joel has undertaken the charge and the command with a key leadership team under him of taking the concept of the democratization of leadership to the next level, and that is to incubate leadership. And if you understand the term incubation, it's a medical term that deals with children that are born prematurely and they have to incubate. Children that are prenatal are incubating in the mother's womb. Animals have to incubate, and it's an argument to go into our society at the government level, at private sector level, and at the full society levels, and to develop any method, approach, tool to be a provocateur, to incubate the growth of leadership as early as you can in one's life, not in one's career. And it's just an exciting thing to be a part of, very much so.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like that. So what is do you want to go more into the Leadership Forum group, or do you think you've covered that enough?
I think so. The Leadership Forum, I've been connected with them since the mid-70s. There was, in the previous session that I did with you a couple weeks ago, I mentioned my mentor, Robert Gardner. And his father, Glenn Gardner, he was one of 4 people started the American Management Association. He was also on the board back in 1918 that held the first leadership conference in Silver Bay, New York on Lake George. And that conference was formed by Henry Ford. It was formed by the Flagler, conglomerate company. All of these early 1900 billionaires that decided to get together on Lake George and to talk about leadership. And Robert Gardner's father, Glenn Gardner, I've never met him, of course. He was dead long before I met Robert, but he was one of the founding fathers of that. And there's a history of the growth of that leadership forum. And then Robert Gardner, as my mentor, introduced me to it in the mid-70s. And Robert is in fact buried on the site up there behind the chapel in Silver Bay as one of the original provocateurs of the Leadership Forum. And now his son, Steve Gardner's part of it. And I mentioned my other mentor, Dick Pryor. His son's also part of it. And I nurtured Dick Pryor's son, Gregory Pryor. So it's been a growth pattern for me to get actively involved, to feed my passion through the Leadership Forum. And this year's the 102nd annual conference. It is virtual, but let me challenge you that if you're interested in being a provocateur in the areas of leadership, organizational development, organizational competency, organizational change, to look into the Leadership Forum community. There's a Facebook site. There is an actual Leadership Forum website. Definitely, get involved in it because it's such a wonderful group of collected and connected provocateurs.
Yeah.
And our mission in life is to continue to stir the pot on incubating leadership,
which is what a provocateur is. And again, so that I'm glad you brought that up, because I want to say, how do I become a provocateur? Well, how can I do that?
It's a mindset. You have to get uncomfortable with being comfortable. And
there's not a card. Do I get a card and a membership application?
No membership card, no application. It does cost to join the Leadership Forum community, but it's well worth the small investment. But you'll connect and network with people who also see themselves as provocateurs, who have the ability to recognize when something needs to be changed, and to have the courage, and courage is a key attribute of a provocateur, to not just say something needs to be changed, but to conceive of what and how and when and why it needs to be changed, and to be very courageous in destroying complacency and comfort of the status quo, so that starting with individuals, organizations move forward into the 21st century. And if not, we're going to get left behind. And if I might take just a moment, one such company that got left behind that's been written about a long time is Sears and Roebuck.
Right.
And Sears continues to blame Amazon. Amazon had nothing to do with Sears's demise. I want you to conceive for a moment the original company from the 1800s that published a catalog of products and services that was 384 pages thick. And they had the opportunity with the advent of technology to convert that catalog digitally, and they chose not to do it. And their board of directors consistently said, we don't need to change the culture of Sears. We don't need to change how we do business. Our customers' grandparents and their grandparents before them and their grandparents before them shopped at Sears, and they will continue to shop at Sears the way it is. And so they got left behind. And if you think about it, they had the opportunity to be there before Amazon because they had the analog catalog that they could have converted digitally and distributed it in the same way that Amazon has done it. And they chose not to do it.
I remember, and folks, I've been through his research for this, and I've known Charlie for a while, but I did get a chance to sit through one of his training classes. I know, Charlie, I think you told the story of Blockbuster, also another company that got left behind because
absolutely,
I believe they had the chance to buy a small disruptive company called Netflix, correct?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they passed on that. And look,
it'll never fly is what they said. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, folks, if you do have a chance to check out the leadership forum community, I've gone to a couple of the online meetings. They're usually at least Eastern time. They're around lunchtime, 12 o'clock. They have fascinating speakers. I think the cost to join, and Charlie, you and I don't get any commission out of this, but there's a very low cost
not at all.
to join.
Yeah.
I think it's a very low fee, but you get a chance to sit through some fascinating speakers with amazing and interesting concepts when it comes to leadership. So,
and there's also just a plethora of opportunities to get involved, to be an activist and a provocateur, and that's what this organization is about.
Right, and to be a provocateur, you got to put yourself out there like Elvis. And I'm going to tell the folks, Charlie, I'm going to tell them. But you have a couple of jumpsuits. You've done Elvis before, you've done an Elvis tribute, right? Am I not correct?
I have done an Elvis tribute, and I used to actually get paid ungodly fees to do an Elvis act in nightclubs back in the late '70s, early '80s, and
right.
I even used to do my Elvis act at Finnegan's Irish Pub on site at Universal Studios, and I usually did it when people were feeling down and blue and just needed to be cheered up. So
right.
It's like
good stuff, and obviously activist, provocateur. So look, we're winding down our time, but I do want to ask you. The challenge, and you talk about incubating, you talk about growing leaders, even at a really, really young age. So there's a whole new generation. And, I got to say, someone that has as seasoned as you, right? You've been doing this for years and years and years. And I would think when someone gets to a certain point in their career, they don't want to be the provocateur. They just want to stay with the status quo, right? They just, at least that's the way I perceive it, but you've never ever taken that path. And so what would you say to newer generations of young people that want to enter this field?
Well, you have to start with the philosophy that Dr. Peter Senge gave us in his book, The Fifth Discipline, and that is to be a lifelong learner. And what you mentioned about, people get to a certain point in their career, Dr. Senge says that people plateau and they just don't see the need to learn anything else. I mean, and some people will say, hey, I've got a bachelor's degree, I don't need to learn anything else. Yeah, you do. You're not going to learn anything out of a bachelor's degree that's going to help move society forward, particularly if your discipline is to develop and grow people and organizations. So here's the challenge. You have to start with that mindset of lifelong learning. You have to be courageous. You have to be willing to disrupt systems that don't work. You have to be willing to take the risk, although I would recommend calculated risk, because I myself have taken a few risks in my career that I didn't think them through fully. And you end up being in the principal's office explaining why. And I've been called a lot of strange names by CEOs for doing things like that. But in the end, you know, you end up moving the needle ever so slowly, a little bit at a time. So be courageous, and, you know, don't be afraid to recognize that change occurs with one person, one step at a time. Pull the rug out from under complacency. If something seems to be working and people are too comfortable with it, disrupt it. Disrupt it. That might be contradictory to what you've heard in the past. If it's not broken, break it and make it better.
Mm-hmm.
That was Edward Deming's philosophy about the quality movement that we as a nation failed so dismally in the 1980s in trying to implement. And so, you know, be courageous, have that lifelong learning, and don't be afraid to be a provocateur. Remember, provocateurs only make the stew better by stirring the pot. But I would caution you to make sure that you have the right tools to go in that pot to stir it, and that you make sure that the pot has got the right seasoning in it. And the seasoning has to do with your own education, your own development, your own growth. The Center for Creative Leadership repeatedly says, and this is what feeds my passion, you cannot be a provocateur. You cannot incubate leadership. You can't help other people and organizations grow without a sense of self-awareness, self-development, and self-accountability.
I love that. I
So
love that. You know,
that would be my challenge.
yeah, I've heard that, you know, just very simple. Leaders are readers, right? Leaders are readers, and they educate themselves. I'll put a lot of that information, contact information, in the show notes. But Charlie, if people wanted to get hold of you to continue this conversation, possibly engage you and your company in helping them be provocateurs themselves, or I got to tell you, and I've seen this before, and I've been in situations where I'm in a company and we're just everyone's kind of landlocked into one way of thinking, can't figure out how to get out of this room. And I know that when someone comes in and say, you don't have to go out the door you came in, blow a hole through this wall. What? Right? Yeah. Right?
Yeah,
and I know that's what you do. So how could people get in touch with the guy that would blow a hole in the wall?
There you go. The easiest way to get in touch with me is my email address, all lowercase, Charlie Walsh, CharlieWalsh at HOPSINTL.com. That stands for Hops International. We also have a very kind of a basic website, but I'm in the process of trying to get my webmaster to update it a little bit. It has been updated recently, but our website is www.hopsintl.com. And you can take a look at some of the things we've done there. It's probably about 2 years old, so it does need a little update. But you can also access me through there because my phone number's on there. I do take phone calls. I would encourage you to start a conversation with me. I love them.
All right, folks, be a provocateur, be an activist, be a leader. If you can't get out of the room, blow a hole in the wall, build a new door. What? We can do that? Absolutely, you can do that. All right. So Charlie Walsh, thank you for being here. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the Elvis mug. Yeah, folks.
Thank you, Chuck.
Yeah, the HR Leadership Spotlight Show. I love HR. I love talking to leaders. I love talking to thought provocateurs. in the industry. If you are a provocateur, if you're an activist, if you want to get your message out, come on my show. Just message me. I'd love to have you on. And until then, folks, be safe out there. Charlie, once again, thanks for coming. See you, folks.
Thank you, guys. Be safe.